This week on Act Out, you may have heard through the Wikileaks grapevine that the CIA has upped the surveillance state spy game. Well, here's the scoop and what you can do to keep spying eyes at bay. Next up, a huge portion of your federal tax dollars go to war. And if that doesn't sit well with you, here's one way to resist. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. So, you may have heard, the CIA could be listening to your phone conversations, recording your Skype calls, and even spying on you through your television. The latest bombshell from WikiLeaks, codenamed Vault 7, revealed the Central Intelligence Agency's secret toolbox of technological exploits. The leak is terrifying, to be sure, but it also gives tech companies valuable new information about how to protect their users, if they're into that sort of thing. And for everyday activists on the front lines, there are some vital and really simple steps that we can take to protect our allies and our plans from surveillance. Now, we still don't actually know who's responsible for the Vault 7 leak, although WikiLeaks released a statement saying that the anonymous source, quote, wishes to initiate a public debate about the security, creation, use, proliferation, and democratic control of cyberweapons. A bit like Snowden had said when he leaked. WikiLeaks describes Vault 7 as the CIA's arsenal of, quote, malware, viruses, trojans, weaponized zero-day exploits, malware remote control systems, and associated documentation, including exploits which target a wide range of US and European company products, including Apple's iPhone, Google's Android, and Microsoft's Windows, and even Samsung TVs, which are turned into covert microphones. Creepy. Even more disturbing than the very existence of these secret spy tools is the fact that the CIA actually lost control of its cyber weapons. The archive appears to have been circulated among former US government hackers and contractors in an unauthorized manner, one of whom has provided WikiLeaks with portions of the archive. They created a monster, and now Frankenspire is on the loose. On the flip side, however, after releasing selected details to the public and the media, WikiLeaks has promised to supply the details of the CIA's exploits to device manufacturers, meaning that Apple and Google and the rest can hopefully begin to patch these holes. That being said, there is no doubt that the surveillance state has upped their spy game. What used to take a team of people to bug your room and then lurk in a creepy van down the street now takes one guy in his cushy office watching you watch your TV. Smartphones and the proliferation of the so-called Internet of Things, or as computer security researchers like to call it, the Internet of Shit, because it is notoriously insecure, have certainly made it easier to spy on all of us. Essentially, we've willingly let the cops and the feds into our living rooms. Amazon even turned over Alexa recordings to police in an Arkansas murder case in early March. So, in light of all this, what can we do? Is there any hope that we can keep our plans private and our comrades and allies safe, at least from local police and less determined state and federal agents? In short, yes. Now, you may have heard that this leak revealed that the encryption in popular messaging services like WhatsApp or Signal was broken. But these early reports were wrong, and popular encryption methods are still as secure as ever. As Open Whisper Systems, makers of one of the most popular encrypted messaging apps, Signal, tweeted on the same day that WikiLeaks released Vault 7. The CIA/WikiLeaks story today is about getting malware onto phones. None of the exploits are in Signal or break Signal protocol encryption. The story isn't about Signal or WhatsApp, but to the extent that it is, we see it as confirmation that what we're doing is working. Ubiquitous end-to-end encryption is pushing intelligence agencies from undetectable mass surveillance to expensive, high-risk, targeted attacks. In other words, encrypt, encrypt, encrypt. and take these simple steps to help keep spying eyes at bay. The first thing that you should consider is what security experts call threat modeling, which basically means determining how risky your plans are and therefore how big of a target you have painted on your back. The Electronic Frontier Foundation has a detailed guide to surveillance self-defense at ssd.eff.org, including a great introduction to threat modeling. And I'll just go through the EFF's 5 threat modeling questions to ask. So when you're planning an action or seeking to protect your movement, ask yourself first, what do you want to protect? 2, who do you want to protect it from? 3, how likely is it that you'll need to protect it? 4, how bad are the consequences if you fail? And 5, how much trouble are you willing to go through in order to try to prevent those consequences? Now, the EFF's guide goes into more detail than I can include here, so you should definitely study it yourself. But essentially what threat modeling means is that the more likely someone is to try to shut down your protest, your action, or even your movement as a whole, the more precautions you should take to stay safe. So, for example, a 3-person team that's carrying out a single banner drop on a freeway overpass would need to take fewer precautions than dozens or hundreds of people planning a major shutdown of a highway or a multi-day occupation of a public space. To be extra safe, plan sensitive actions in person with only trusted allies. And if you're worried about someone using your phone to listen in on your meeting, turn it off before you get to the meeting. Or better yet, leave it at home, because keep in mind that even if your phone is off, it can still be a medium for surveillance. If you've got anything sensitive on your phone, which at this point is pretty much everybody, it is important that you lock your phone and use a long passcode of at least 8 characters. iPhones are automatically encrypted when you password protect them, but Android users, you will need to go into your phone security settings and turn on phone encryption. Do not lose your password though, because you will now need it from now on to turn on your phone. And for all of you iPhone users, it is just not a good idea to use the cute little fingerprint lock feature, even though a federal judge recently ruled that police can't compel you to unlock your phone using a fingerprint reader. The ruling is simply too new, and police have been getting away with forcing people to unlock their phones for too long. So you're still better off with just a passcode. Also, again, just seriously consider leaving your phone at home before a protest or direct action where there's a high risk of arrest. In one recent chilling example, police kept most of the phones of the activists who were arrested at the J20 inauguration protests and are using them to map out networks of activist groups for infiltration and state harassment. So at the very, very least, turn off your phone before you're arrested, or if you can, buy a cheap burner phone to use just for the event that can be destroyed if arrest is imminent. And even when you aren't about to take to the streets, one of the most important steps that anyone can take to make you and your contacts safer from surveillance is to, again, encrypt your communications, which means quit planning shit using Facebook Messenger. Signal, the Snowden-approved app we've mentioned above, is available for free on both iPhone and Android, and it's one of the simplest and most secure options for text messaging, voice, and even video chats. Just download Signal from the App Store and follow the simple on-screen setup after you launch the app. And it takes less than 5 minutes, even if you're not a tech genius at all. So once you're up and running, any text messages, phone calls, and video calls made through the Signal app are encrypted, as long as the recipient is also using Signal. Of course, this obviously means that not only do you have to download Signal, but you need to encourage all of your friends, your lawyer, your activist buddies, and your family to do the same. After all, if it's just a few activists encrypting our communication while the rest just continue to use open messaging, might as well just be broadcasting spy on us to the world. But if all of us, activists and supporters alike, use Signal and other forms of encryption for our everyday messaging, it becomes way harder for the government and the corporations that control the government to target the activists on the ground. And look, even if you're not planning a protest, These tools allow anyone who doesn't want the fucking government spying on them to utilize secure tools to thwart the surveillance state. Because it's not about whether you have something to hide or not. It's about our right to private communication, even if it's just you and your friends talking about dinner plans. So start using Signal and other forms of encryption whenever you can. It is a super easy way that all of us can protect ourselves and the activists on the front lines. The will of the people, the ills of the sheeple, the groupthink, the unthink, the blind eyes and dull minds that sway left and right, the stay in line, we've got time, we'll be all right. The why would I, why should I care? The shrugs at the bombs and the turns from the mobs, the pacifists proudly protected by privilege, the unprivileged pacing a cage, happy because they were told it's free range, waving the flag for the free and the brave. The bigots and haters, the sexist, the racist, the I'm not political, thanks, see you later. The will of the people. The will of the people. The will, what you would, what you could do. Will, from sheeple at slaughter to new sons and daughters of change, rolling the revolution will be made by the will of the people. The will of the people. Which reminds me, it's tax season. And you may have heard that our already obese military budget is getting a 10% raise, and that's not including a 7.3% raise for Homeland Security. If you're like me, you look at that and think, oh, for fuck's sake, that means that this 2015 breakdown is going to see even more of that slice go to bombing innocent kids thousands of miles away, while we see an increase in homeless, hungry, and miseducated, if not altogether uneducated kids here at home. And if that makes you sick, check this out. The National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee, an organization dedicated to providing information, support, and resources to people and groups who choose to resist paying federal taxes, due to the fact that most of it goes to funding death and destruction. To get more of a scoop on resisting war taxes, we sat down with Sam Koplinka-Lair, the community organizer and outreach consultant for National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee. Take a look.
As long as there has been war, there have been war tax resistors, dating back hundreds and hundreds of years. Here on this continent, the Algonquin tribe in the 1600s refused to pay taxes to the Dutch because the Dutch wanted to build a new fort. And so that was a method of tax resistance at that time in the 1600s. There have been famous war tax resistors throughout history. And the modern war tax movement started in around the 1940s with World War II. And since then, there have been war tax resistors in the United States for the past 70 years, at times upwards of a few 100,000 war tax resistors. People who refuse to pay taxes to the U.S. government because of the way that the money is used for war, for police, for prisons, for these systems of oppression that we don't believe that's how we should be spending our money in our communities. And so we refuse to pay taxes in order to, as an act of civil disobedience, in refusal with how this money is spent.
So, I mean, the question, the automatic question that then arises is, isn't it illegal to not pay taxes? And there was a recent Guardian article where Ruth Ben, a coordinator for the NWTRCC, she said that she hadn't been taken to court. There weren't any holds on her bank accounts or anything. She did get a small amount taken out once. But others have had their lives destroyed by the IRS. Talk about like this difference and the legality of not paying taxes.
Right. So there's many different ways that people practice war tax resistance, some of which are illegal. If you owe taxes and you do not pay taxes, technically that is illegal under the tax code and under the laws. So there are people who have been prosecuted for that, whether that's actually being taken to court or getting letters from the IRS. There's, in general, the number of people who face consequences, prosecution, jail time is very, very low compared to the number of people who practice war tax resistance. In the past 80 years or so, there have been less than 100 cases where there's actually been charges brought against people who are war tax resistors. And that's compared with hundreds of thousands of people who have actually practiced war tax resistance.
Is that a capacity issue? Like the IRS just can't find all of you, or is it based on how much you owe each year?
I guess it's a little bit hard to say. In the past decade or so, it's definitely a capacity issue, and that the IRS has faced funding cuts, and so we have seen in the past few decades a remarked decrease in the amount of sanctions against war tax resistors. If the war tax resistance movement continues to grow and grow and grow, my guess is that we'll see an increase in terms of prosecutions and that kind of thing. So it does seem as though it changes over time, depending on the number of war tax resistors and depending on the capacity of the IRS. The one thing that I would say that a lot of people do get, though, is letters from the IRS. In general, if you're a war tax resistor, you get a whole stream of letters from the IRS. Everything from, hey, you owe taxes, to we're planning on seizing money from your bank account, and all sorts of threats there. Do get money seized from their paycheck or their bank account. It depends case to case. A lot of war tax resistors have never had any seizures of their bank account or what have you. Others have regular seizures of their bank account. So it really depends on the person and on the situation, it seems.
So in that same vein, part of what the committee does is walk people through how to avoid paying federal taxes, and that there seems to be an emphasis on federal taxes, not state and local taxes. Talk about that difference, and also like what an example of like a few of the steps that you tell people to take.
Right. So our organization, the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee, or NUTRIC, we support folks who refuse federal taxes. And the reason for that being is that the federal income tax has been the focus of where most of the military spending comes from. There are some state funds like National Guard and what have you, but for the most part, the military industrial complex comes out of the federal budget. And so that has been the primary focus of our resistance and the work that we do. There are war tax resistors that refuse state and local taxes for varying reasons, sometimes because of money that goes to prisons or the police or other forms of oppression. But our work is supporting people who refuse federal taxes.
So talk about this support network. Is it also like a legal support network that you offer, or is it basically just here's how you go about doing resisting taxes?
Yeah, so we're not lawyers, we're not accountants or tax professionals. We don't say that we're offering any type of legal or tax advice. It really comes out of decades and decades of experience. And so this network of across the entire country, in every state and most cities, you can find somebody who is a resource, who's been a war tax resistor and can walk you through at least their experiences with it, and walk you through different tactics that war tax resistors use. But that said, we're not telling people what they should do. We're really providing resources, saying these are some ways that people have done war tax resistance. We can't and shouldn't say this is how you should do it. But it's really about mutual support and mutual aid. So there is elements of organizing as well. So, for example, if somebody has their money seized, for example, and it's a financial hardship for them and they can't make rent or that kind of thing, then that's a way in which, as people in that community, we can support them. We can do fundraisers so that they can pay rent, that kind of thing. So the power comes from having tens of thousands of people who are supporting each other in a network, not necessarily saying you're going to have a lawyer if you're taken to court. There are lawyers who do support our network, but that's not a guarantee. It's really about a mutual aid and support.
So in that same vein, I noticed your shirt. Talk a little bit about the privilege that is involved in tax resistance and how you might guide someone who wants to consider tax resistance as civil disobedience. What would you say to them based on their specific type of privilege?
So Our identities are constantly coming into play when we're thinking about action. And even just the notion of taking a calculated risk, comes out of a place of privilege. If you're Black in this country, you're targeted, period. You could get arrested walking down the street. And so, in terms of thinking about, I want to take a calculated risk of civil disobedience, that's, in many ways very white. And so the network historically has been predominantly white, and there are risks, especially for people who don't have citizenship status. If you're undocumented, if you're trying to get papers, if you're trying to go for citizenship, war tax resistance is not recommended. One of the first things for citizenship that they look at is whether or not you've paid taxes, and so that is a huge thing that you need to consider if you're undocumented. For the most part, I would say that. That's the element of privilege around, especially whiteness, that really we need to be upfront about, and that if you are Black, if you're brown, you're being targeted, period, and that taking on additional risk is something that you need to think about. This can be a tactic for folks who want to not pay for the bullets that are killing their children. If you're Black, if you're brown. And yet it also needs to be something that's carefully considered, just like any direct action. Yeah.
So talk about if you or in fact the organization has a perspective on this, because there are factions like libertarians and people like that feel that paying any sort of tax is not a good thing and it infringes upon our freedoms. Does the committee have a perspective on that, and also like an alternative to the federal military industrial complex tax, it's like, we support a kind of system that would give people the right to choose where their taxes go?
Right. Great question. Yeah, so there are, again, there's many different types of war tax resistors, people who come from all sorts of different walks of life. There is a campaign within the movement called the Peace Tax Fund, which is trying to get legislation at the federal level that would allow people to mark that they don't want their taxes spent in certain ways. That's one movement. There's also, in general, war tax resistors redirect their tax money. And they, instead of paying it to the federal government, they take that money and they give it to other organizations. So this year, what we are encouraging folks to do in their communities is redirect that money to resistance that's led by Black folks, brown folks, indigenous people, and really taking money from the U.S. government, which is in many ways a white supremacist organization, and giving that money to folks who are targeted by state violence and targeted by white supremacy, who are doing fierce organizing in our communities. So that's really the difference, I would say, between us and kind of a libertarian tax resistance movement, is that we are encouraging people to take that money and put it in their communities to build the world that they want, to build a world where we're actually fighting for peace, where we're fighting for justice, where our communities are fighting against these different forms of oppression. Yeah.
So it is sort of this idea of you're building an alternative in your own communities while fighting an oppressive system.
Exactly. Yeah, and that the money is actually a direct way to do that. As you're refusing money over here, you can reinvest that money in the things that you actually believe should be in your community.
For more information on war tax resistance, visit nwtrcc.org. And that'll do it for this week's Dose of Dissent. Thank you so much for watching. Please spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people you don't know. Quick note, we will be off next week, but keep an eye out for updates from Down Under. I will be performing some spoken word and speaking at Zeitgeist Fest in Brisbane, Australia this weekend. And I'll try to share as much as I can from the awesome lineup of artists, activists, and badass revolutionaries. In the meantime, check out The Last Lie to see the sites mentioned in this week's show, and be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. From Los Angeles, a different Devil's Den, good night and act out. To keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, donate at Occupy.com/donate. If you'd like to donate directly to Act Out, visit Patreon.com/actout.